There are places in the world that appear ordinary at first glance, yet conceal secrets deep within their soil. A hill in West Java, Indonesia, known to villagers as Gunung Padang, looks like little more than a rise in the forest, green, quiet, unassuming. But beneath its slopes, stone terraces climb in ordered steps, and hidden foundations reach down into the earth. Some researchers believe these layers may be older than any pyramid known, perhaps 28,000 years in age. If true, this hill would overturn much of what we believe about the beginnings of civilization. To most, history begins with Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the great river valleys. Yet what if the story stretched further back, into an age when glaciers still ruled the north, when seas lay lower, and lands we no longer see were alive with human voices? Could a forgotten culture, long before the dawn of writing, have built monuments to the stars and to memory? Gunung Padang stands as a question carved in stone, daring us to wonder whether our timeline is incomplete, whether greatness has risen and fallen before. Let us walk softly now into this mystery of earth and sky. Welcome to historic sleep. If you're drawn to stories like these, the ones that live in the shadows between what we see and what was made to disappear, feel free to like and subscribe only if it feels right. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it for you right now? I love seeing our little map of watchers light up around the world. The story begins with a hill that for centuries seemed ordinary to the villagers who lived in its shadow. Gunung Padang, rising modestly from the lush forests of West Java, had long been a place of quiet reverence. Children climbed its grassy slopes, herders let their animals graze, and elders told whispered tales of spirits that watched from its stones. At first glance, nothing about the hill seemed to carry the weight of deep history. Yet beneath its surface, subtle clues hinted at something far older, far stranger than anyone could have imagined. When surveyors first studied the site in detail during the 20th century, they expected to find little more than weathered terraces and scattered stones. Instead, they uncovered carefully arranged columns of andesite rock, volcanic stone deliberately shaped and placed. The arrangement suggested human intention, not the random hand of nature. Archaeologists recognized the patterns of steps and retaining walls, leading upward like a monumental staircase. What had once looked like nothing more than a natural rise in the land revealed itself as a pyramid cloaked in earth and time. The local people had always regarded the hill as sacred. They believed it was a gathering place for ancestors, a site where offerings could cross the veil between the living and the unseen. Rituals performed there were not simply cultural habits, but echoes of an older knowledge passed down without explanation. Modern researchers, however, began to suspect that these traditions preserved memories of a structure constructed thousands of years before. Ground-penetrating radar brought further revelations. Instead of a single layer of stones, the surveys revealed hidden chambers and foundations reaching deep below the surface. Each stratum seemed to belong to a different period of construction. Some portions matched the age of megalithic sites across Southeast Asia. Others, startlingly, appeared to date back tens of thousands of years. If those results were accurate, Gunung Padang might not only be the oldest pyramid in the world, it might also overturn the entire timeline of human civilization. Such claims met immediate skepticism. Conventional archaeology holds that complex architecture began around 10,000 years ago, after the last ice age, when humans transitioned from nomadic foraging to settled farming. A pyramid 28,000 years old would mean advanced societies existed long before the accepted dawn of civilization. The hill, once overlooked, suddenly became the center of a debate that stretched from university halls to late-night firesides. Was this truly a monument from a forgotten age, or was it simply the result of misinterpretation, a natural formation mistaken for human craft? The mystery of Gunung Padang deepened as soil samples, stone alignments, and oral traditions interwove. Each clue suggested intention, design, and a sense of purpose. The builders, whoever they were, seemed determined to shape a mountain into memory. For some, it evoked comparisons with the pyramids of Egypt, rising proudly from the desert sands. Yet, unlike Giza, Gunung Padang was not carved in open air, but concealed beneath layers of earth, as if the world itself conspired to hide its origin. What made this discovery even more compelling was its context. West Java lies near the heart of the Sunda shelf, a landmass that during the Ice Age was larger than India. It connected what are now islands, Sumatra, Java, Borneo, into one continuous plain. When the seas rose, much of this land disappeared. Could Gunung Padang be a relic from that drowned continent? If so, the pyramid was not merely a local wonder, but a monument to a world lost beneath the waves. In that sense, the hill became more than stone and soil. It became a question carved into the landscape. Who were the builders? How did they quarry and transport tons of volcanic rock? Why did they choose this hilltop? And what purpose did the pyramid serve? Ritual center? Astronomical observatory? Or something even more enigmatic? The answers remained hidden, folded within layers of time, waiting for those who dared to look deeper. As twilight settles on the terraces, the stones seem to glow with an inner warmth, like embers from a forgotten fire. Standing there, one might feel both humbled and unsettled, sensing that the earth holds memories far older than the stories we tell. And thus, the journey begins, with a hill, a mystery, and the quiet realization that history may be far longer and far stranger than we allow ourselves to believe. Beneath the green carpet of grass and roots, Gunung Padang conceals a labyrinth of stone. What the eye perceives as a simple hill is, under closer inspection, a layered monument, rising not only upward into the air, but downward into the earth. When teams of geologists brought their instruments to the site, they expected to find bedrock. Instead, they encountered blocks, massive andesite prisms stacked with deliberate order. Each layer told a story. The uppermost terraces, with their mossy stones, had been known to locals for generations. They formed visible steps where ceremonies once unfolded. But below, hidden from human sight for millennia, were deeper layers of construction. Ground-penetrating radar-mapped chambers and voids, suggesting the presence of hidden rooms or tunnels. Core drilling revealed compacted stone foundations far older than the topmost layer. The pyramid was not built in one age. It was a palimpsest, rewritten by successive hands over vast spans of time. This discovery unsettled the assumption that megalithic construction appeared suddenly in the Neolithic era. If the deepest foundations truly dated back 20 millennia or more, then architecture was not the privilege of settled agriculturalists, but of earlier, little understood societies. Some researchers speculated that successive cultures returned to the hill, each refurbishing and reshaping it, while preserving the sacredness of its original design. What we call a sight might in fact be a dialogue across ages, builders answering to the voices of builders before them. To grasp the significance, one must picture the land as it was. 28,000 years ago, Java was not an island, but part of a sprawling subcontinent. Rivers ran across fertile plains, and human groups roamed landscapes teeming with giant fauna. In such a setting, Gunung Padang could have been a beacon, a center for gathering, ritual, or observation. Layer by layer, its terraces were added, each stone carrying not only weight, but memory. The layered construction also sparked fierce debate. Some argued the supposed chambers detected by radar might be nothing more than natural fissures in volcanic rock. Others countered that the arrangement of the andesite columns was too systematic, the geometry too intentional. One core sample revealed organic material sealed within the lower strata, carbon dated to approximately 24,000 years ago. If accurate, this single clue would rewrite the narrative of human achievement. Yet mainstream archaeology remained cautious. Extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence, they reminded. Perhaps the hill had been reshaped intermittently, with natural processes masquerading as human architecture. But even skeptics conceded the site was unusual. Few natural hills displayed terraces so evenly spaced, or stones set in patterns echoing stairways. The motif of layering carried symbolic weight as well. In many cultures, layers signify connection between realms, earth and sky, past and present, the living and the ancestors. Standing on the terraces, one can imagine a processional path spiraling upward, each step not only a climb in altitude, but a journey through epochs. The builders, in shaping these steps, might have been encoding cosmology into the land itself. Stories told by villagers preserved a simpler interpretation. They said the stones had been laid by giants in a single night. Whether metaphor or myth, the tale mirrors what modern research suggests. The monument's presence cannot be explained by ordinary effort alone. It required either immense collective labor or knowledge we have not yet rediscovered. In the quiet of dusk, when the forest hums and the air cools, one might imagine those layers whispering. The hill is not a silent witness, but a library of stone, its pages buried deep, waiting to be read. And as geologists, archaeologists, and dreamers peer deeper into Gunung Padang, the question sharpens: are we uncovering one civilization's monument, or the echoes of many civilizations layered like the stones themselves? The hill holds its answer in silence, compelling us onward, inviting the next descent into its depths. The controversy over Gunung Padang sharpened not with the discovery of stones, but with the measurement of time. To suggest a monument was ancient was one thing. To give it an age of 28,000 years was another. Numbers carry authority, and the numbers emerging from the site seemed almost impossible. In laboratories, samples of soil and organic matter drawn from beneath the stones were subjected to radiocarbon analysis. This method, which measures the decay of carbon isotopes in once living material, is the standard clock for dating artifacts up to 50,000 years old. When the first results returned, some showed dates between 13,000 and 16,000 years before present, already a challenge to accepted timelines. But others pushed back even further, to around 24,000 years, and in one case, nearly 28,000. If true, Gunung Padang would be older than Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, the current icon of early monumental architecture. Such claims rippled through the academic world. Mainstream archaeologists raised objections. They argued that organic material might have migrated downward through cracks, giving a false impression of age. They pointed out that dating soil beneath stones does not necessarily reveal when the stones were placed. The structure, they said, could be much younger, while the soil itself came from an earlier deposit. Proponents of the older age countered with other lines of evidence. Geophysical surveys revealed not only layered stones, but voids suggestive of chambers sealed for tens of millennia. The stratigraphy, the order of layers, appeared consistent. Younger terraces built atop older foundations, each sealed with soil and weathering before the next phase began. It was not merely random rubble, but a construction sequence spanning eras. This debate reflected a larger tension within archaeology: the clash between extraordinary hypotheses and the caution of consensus. Traditional models of history place the rise of complex architecture within the Holocene epoch, after the Ice Age ended. Hunters and foragers of the Paleolithic, according to this model, lacked both the population size and the organizational capacity for monumental building. Yet here, in the forests of West Java, evidence suggested otherwise. The stakes were profound. If Gunung Padang was truly built 28,000 years ago, then civilization as we know it did not begin in Mesopotamia or Egypt, but had earlier, forgotten chapters. It would mean that long before cuneiform writing or Nile agriculture, human beings somewhere in Southeast Asia had mastered stonework, geometry, and communal construction on a vast scale. Critics urged restraint. They reminded that extraordinary ages had been claimed before, only to be revised downward with more careful study. Supporters, however, pointed to parallels. The discovery of Göbekli Tepe itself had once been dismissed as fantasy, until excavations confirmed its age of 12,000 years. What seemed implausible in one decade could become accepted fact in the next. In local lore, the idea of ancient builders was never strange. Elders spoke of ancestors who knew the stars and the stones, who raised monuments to mark time and to honor spirits. These stories, told long before radiocarbon dating existed, now seemed to align with scientific whispers from the Earth itself. The dating controversy became less about numbers and more about perspective. Was history a straight line, moving neatly from primitive to advanced? Or was it a broken line where civilizations rose, fell, and were forgotten, leaving fragments buried in unexpected places? Gunung Padang forced this question into the open. Standing on the terraces, surrounded by the call of cicadas and the cool breath of mountain air, one might feel the weight of those numbers pressing down. 13,000, 16,000, 28,000. Each possibility carries a different story of who we are and where we came from. None of them fits comfortably within the boundaries of textbooks. The stones keep their counsel. They do not confirm or deny. They simply endure, silent witnesses to time beyond memory. And as scientists argue in journals and conferences, the hill waits, holding its secrets in layers that only patience or imagination can reach. When the radiocarbon numbers whispered of impossible antiquity, another story began to stir. One not written in stone or measured in isotopes, but carried in the breath of myth. Across Indonesia, and indeed across much of the world, tales of great floods endure. They speak of lands drowned, of people scattered, of monuments swallowed by earth and sea. In the shadow of Gunung Padang, such legends feel less like folklore and more like memories veiled in poetry. The people of West Java tell of ancient waters that once surged across the lowlands, reshaping the land. Further east, in Bali and Sulawesi, myths recall the sea rising to consume villages, forcing survivors to higher ground. In Sumatra, elders repeat stories of a time when the ocean claimed forests in a single sweep, leaving only the mountain peaks above the tide. These tales echo the experiences of generations who may have witnessed or inherited memory of the cataclysms at the end of the Ice Age. Around the same period, global myths converge. In Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh recounts a deluge that wiped out humanity's pride, sparing only those guided by divine warning. In the highlands of Peru, legends speak of waters that covered valleys, leaving survivors to cling to mountaintops. Polynesian oral traditions describe islands sinking beneath waves, the ocean claiming whole homelands. The stories differ in detail, but they share a haunting refrain: a world undone by rising seas. Geology confirms part of this mythic chorus. At the end of the Pleistocene, roughly 12 to 14,000 years ago, glaciers melted and sea levels rose more than 100 meters. Vast regions of the Sunda shelf, once dry plains connecting what are now islands, vanished beneath the ocean. What is now the Java Sea, the Gulf of Thailand, and the South China Sea were once fertile landscapes, alive with rivers, forests, and game. For early peoples, the loss would have been unimaginable, like watching a continent dissolve. If Gunung Padang's oldest layers truly reach back to 28,000 years, then the monument may have stood long before the seas rose, in a time when Sundaland stretched wide and fertile. Later floods would have isolated it, turning its builders into exiles on shrinking islands. The pyramid, then, could be read as both sanctuary and memorial, a structure meant to endure when everything else was swept away. Some researchers suggest that the very act of building such monuments may have been tied to the trauma of loss. To carve terraces into a hill, to stack stones in layers, is to create permanence against impermanence. Each step becomes a refusal to forget, a way of inscribing human presence onto a landscape destined to change. Seen this way, Gunung Padang is not only a pyramid, but a message across time. We were here, and we endured. Critics, of course, caution against conflating myth with fact. Flood legends, they say, are universal because water is universal. Every culture has faced storms, tides, and rivers, but the consistency of imagery, rising seas swallowing vast lands, survivors clinging to mountains, suggests more than coincidence. It suggests a shared memory of an upheaval so great it imprinted itself into the collective imagination of humankind. In the glow of evening, as mist drapes the terraces of Gunung Padang, one might hear the echo of waves in the rustle of leaves. The stones, rising tier upon tier, resemble steps climbing above an invisible tide. Whether intended or not, the monument mirrors the human instinct to reach higher when the waters rise. And so the hill becomes not only a puzzle of stone and soil, but a vessel of memory. It links the measurable ages of carbon decay with the immeasurable ages of myth. Between science and story lies a truth too large for either alone. Gunung Padang seems to stand at that threshold, reminding us that history is not only what is written in books, but what is whispered in the night, in the rhythm of waves, in the tremor of earth after a storm. To gaze upon the terraces of Gunung Padang is to face a question as old as the stones themselves. How were they shaped, and by what hands? Each block of volcanic andesite weighs hundreds of kilograms, some even more. They are cut into angular forms, resembling hexagonal columns, then placed with precision into stepped arrangements. No matter how weathered they appear today, their original placement betrays intent: measured lines, deliberate angles, and the unmistakable mark of order. Yet the question remains: what tools could a people of such remote antiquity have wielded? The mainstream answer is simple: stone hammers, persistence, and collective effort. Early societies, it is argued, had no need for advanced technology. With enough time, enough hands, and enough will, even the heaviest blocks can be moved. After all, the megaliths of Stonehenge were transported by Neolithic farmers with no metal, no wheels, only ingenuity. Why should Gunung Padang be different? But when one descends into the deeper layers, those hinted at by core samples suggesting ages far older than Stonehenge, the explanations begin to strain. 28,000 years ago, humans in this region are thought to have lived as hunter-gatherers. They left behind tools of bone and flint, traces of fire pits, fragments of shell. Nothing in the archaeological record points to the capacity for lifting and shaping monumental stone. To place a block weighing a ton onto a terraced hillside requires more than determination. It demands technique, leverage, coordination, and perhaps devices we no longer imagine. Some theorists speak of lost methods: wooden sledges soaked in water to reduce friction, ropes woven from plant fibers stronger than we suppose, or the use of ramps carved into the hillside. Others speculate about an understanding of sound and vibration, suggesting that stones might have been moved through rhythmic resonance, much like the way voices can make glass tremble. This latter idea, though speculative, draws on curious properties observed at Gunung Padang itself, where certain stones produce ringing tones when struck, as if tuned like instruments. The absence of tools complicates the picture. Excavations at the site have not revealed chisels or blades that could shape andesite efficiently. Andesite, being harder than steel, resists crude stone tools. Yet the blocks are fractured and arranged as though intentionally split. Some geologists note that volcanic andesite naturally forms into columnar joints, fractures that create hexagonal prisms. A resourceful people could have exploited this, selecting and stacking the ready-made forms. If so, the genius of the builders lay not in inventing tools, but in recognizing nature's geometry and bending it to human design. Still, doubts linger. Why would Paleolithic groups invest such immense labor in building terraces on a hill? Nomadic life leaves little need for permanent monuments, unless, of course, permanence was the point. Perhaps these people wished to create something that outlasted them, a gathering place immune to time, a stairway to the cosmos or the spirits. In that case, the monument is less an engineering puzzle and more an existential one. What drove them to such effort, and what did they hope to preserve? Comparisons sharpen the paradox. In Egypt, the Great Pyramid rose around 4,500 years ago, supported by a culture rich in agriculture, hierarchy, and mathematics. At Stonehenge, roughly 5,000 years ago, farming communities gathered season after season to drag stones into place. But Gunung Padang, if its deeper layers truly date back 20 millennia or more, predates both by vast stretches of time. It would mean humans in Southeast Asia built in stone long before the accepted flowering of civilization. One possible answer lies not in lost machines, but in lost organization. To move stones of such scale requires not only strength, but cooperation. A society capable of uniting hundreds of people in a common purpose, whether religious, astronomical, or cultural, might accomplish feats that appear impossible when imagined through the lens of isolated individuals. In this view, the true tool was not metal or wheel, but social cohesion, the ability to dream together and act as one. And yet, the silence of the archaeological record keeps the door ajar. No quarries bearing clear tool marks, no workshops of chisels or sledges, no carvings depicting the methods survive. Only the terraces, moss-covered and enigmatic, endure. Were tools lost in the floods that drowned Sundaland? Were they fashioned of wood, fiber, or other perishable materials that time erased? Or were they never needed because the builders mastered techniques of leverage and balance beyond our modern assumptions? As twilight deepens, the stones of Gunung Padang seem to hum with unanswered questions. Each block, resting where it has rested for untold ages, challenges our imagination. Did forgotten hands lift them with crude hammers and endless patience, or with methods now lost to history? The terraces do not say. They merely stand, a riddle in stone, urging us to look beyond the boundaries of what we think we know. Long before Java was an island, before the seas swallowed valleys and forests, there stretched a continent now remembered only in maps of the deep. Today we call it the Sunda Shelf, or Sundaland, a drowned subcontinent that once connected Sumatra, Borneo, Java, and the Malay Peninsula in one continuous landmass. 20,000 years ago, during the last glacial maximum, sea levels were far lower, and this land was not ocean but plain, threaded with rivers and dotted with lakes. To imagine Sundaland is to picture a Southeast Asia utterly transformed, fertile, expansive, and capable of sustaining dense human communities. It is within this vanished landscape that some scholars place the origins of Gunung Padang. If the monument's deepest layers truly reach back 24 or even 28,000 years, it would mean its builders belonged to this larger world, not the fragmented islands we see today. The pyramid, then, becomes not only a local curiosity, but a relic of a continent erased by the sea. This idea resonates with more than geology. In myths across Indonesia, there linger stories of a lost land beneath the waves. Some traditions tell of great kingdoms that flourished before being drowned, leaving only mountaintops as islands. Balinese legends describe ancestors fleeing floods and settling higher ground. Even in faraway cultures, echoes emerge. Polynesian tales of disappearing islands, Indian epics recalling vanished lands to the southeast. Could all these fragments trace back to Sundaland's slow drowning? For mainstream science, Sundaland is primarily a paleogeographic reality, reconstructed from seafloor maps and climate models. Yet for alternative historians, it has become a stage for speculation about lost civilizations. Some see it as the cradle of human progress, perhaps even the origin of myths, like Atlantis. The argument runs like this. If fertile plains supported large populations, those populations might have developed technologies and knowledge we assume belonged only to later times. When the seas rose, their cities vanished, leaving only scattered survivors to carry fragments of memory into later myths. Gunung Padang fits neatly into this narrative. Its terraces could be the handiwork of a Sundaland culture striving to anchor permanence against the instability of their world. Its location, high on a hill, may have offered refuge from floods, a gathering point when the plains below disappeared. Perhaps it served as both temple and lighthouse, reminding displaced peoples of their roots in a continent no longer visible. Skeptics caution against romanticizing drowned lands. Fertility does not guarantee civilization, they argue. Hunter-gatherers may have thrived on Sundaland without ever advancing beyond seasonal camps. No ruins have been conclusively found beneath the seas of Southeast Asia, though sonar has hinted at formations that spark debate. Without direct evidence, Sundaland, as a cradle of civilization, remains conjecture. Yet conjecture often precedes discovery. Before Göbekli Tepe was unearthed, the idea of monumental architecture in the Paleolithic seemed absurd. Before Troy was found beneath Hisarlik, its story was dismissed as mere legend. In this light, Sundaland's absence of evidence is less a verdict than a challenge. Its drowned plains are difficult to explore, buried under meters of silt and currents hostile to divers. What lies beneath may remain hidden for centuries more. Still, Gunung Padang stands above the waves, stubborn and silent. Its terraces could be the last visible stones of a vanished world. To walk among them is to tread upon a threshold, 1 foot in the present, one in a lost continent. The sound of wind in the grass might recall the breath of plains long gone, while the stones themselves seem to carry the weight of an entire drowned civilization. As night descends and stars scatter across the sky, the imagination drifts outward. If Sundaland was indeed the homeland of Gunung Padang's builders, then its people carried with them knowledge not of conquest or empire, but of survival, how to endure when the ground itself gave way to water. In this sense, the pyramid is not just a relic, it is a witness to resilience, a monument that bridges a continent erased by the sea with the memory of those who refused to be forgotten. Among the terraces of Gunung Padang, there lingers a quality less visible than stone walls or soil layers, yet just as haunting. It is the sound the stones make when touched. Visitors who strike certain blocks with a stick, or even the palm of a hand, report a ringing tone, as though the rock itself were hollow. The andesite columns do not merely sit in silence, they resonate. Some hum deep like a drum, others ring higher, almost metallic. Together they form not just a structure, but an instrument waiting to be played. Archaeologists at first regarded this as a curiosity. Volcanic andesite, when fractured into columnar joints, can create acoustic effects, much like the ringing basalt columns at other megalithic sites. But as more tests were performed, the phenomenon grew harder to ignore. The stones at Gunung Padang produce distinct tones depending on their size and placement, as though selected for their acoustic qualities. One researcher described the site as a lithophone, a stone instrument similar to those still used in traditional music across Vietnam and Africa. If this was intentional, then the builders were not only engineers of stone, but composers of sound. Imagine a ritual gathering thousands of years ago, torches flickering against the terraces, voices chanting in unison, and the rhythmic striking of stones filling the air with vibrations. The entire hill could have been transformed into a resonant space, a temple not of silence but of sound. In many cultures, sound is not entertainment, but a bridge to the sacred. Drums call spirits, flutes mimic the voices of ancestors, chants summon altered states of mind. At Gunung Padang, the very stones may have been the medium of that connection. This possibility deepens the enigma of their construction. To choose resonant stones requires knowledge, not abstract mathematics, but the intimate observation of nature's subtleties. The builders would have tested each block, listening to its tone, arranging them so the monument itself sang. In doing so, they embedded music into architecture, blurring the line between structure and instrument. Skeptics, as always, remain cautious. They argue that the ringing tones are coincidental, the natural byproduct of volcanic rock. But the deliberate selection and placement suggest otherwise. Natural columns occur randomly. Gunung Padang stones form ordered terraces. The resonance could be a side effect of construction, yet it is difficult to ignore the human tendency to notice and exploit such qualities. After all, even simple hunter-gatherer groups crafted rattles, drums, and flutes. Why not extend that instinct to stone? Sound also connects to myth. Local traditions say the site was used for ceremonies long before written memory, a place where offerings were made and chants rose into the night. Across the world, myths often link sound with creation itself. The Hindu Om, the biblical word, the Egyptian concept of the spoken command that shapes reality. If the builders of Gunung Padang believed vibration carried spiritual power, then a resonant pyramid would not merely be a monument, but a channel, a way of harmonizing human voices with the voice of the earth. Some modern researchers extend the idea further, suggesting that resonance may have practical effects. Vibrating stones could induce altered states, amplify chants, or even create standing waves that affected perception. Though such theories remain speculative, they reflect an ancient truth. Humans have always sought to use sound to touch what lies beyond the visible. Picture a night thousands of years ago, the terraces lit by fire, a circle of figures striking stones in rhythm, the hillside alive with booming echoes. The sound rolls down the valleys, carrying not only music but a message, that here, on this hill, people gathered to speak with forces greater than themselves. Long after their voices faded, the stones kept the memory, ready to ring again when touched. Gunung Padang, then, is not only a puzzle of age or engineering, it is also a mystery of sound. Its stones sing, and in their music lies a clue to the minds of its builders, people who may have known that the world is not only seen but heard, not only measured but felt. To walk among these terraces is to walk through a frozen orchestra, a place where silence itself waits to be awakened. When researchers mapped the terraces of Gunung Padang, they began to notice something beyond the geometry of stone. The monument did not simply climb the hillside at random. Its steps seemed to gesture toward the heavens. Orientation has long been the silent language of sacred architecture. From the pyramids of Giza to the stone circles of Britain, builders aligned their monuments with the rising of stars, the setting of the sun, or the changing of seasons. Could the same be true of this hill in West Java? Surveyors recorded the orientation of the main terraces and stairways, noting how some pathways pointed toward specific azimuths, angles on the horizon where celestial bodies appear. Early analyses suggested alignments with the rising sun at solstices when daylight begins its seasonal journey north or south. Other lines hinted at possible connections with Orion's belt, a trio of stars that has guided farmers, sailors, and storytellers across cultures. If the builders of Gunung Padang oriented their pyramid to the sky, then the monument becomes more than stone upon stone. It becomes a calendar carved into the earth, a bridge between time on earth and eternity above. This possibility is not without precedent. In Peru, the city of Caral aligns its plazas with solar events. In Mexico, Teotihuacan's Avenue of the Dead runs along a path connected to star clusters. Even Göbekli Tepe, the 12,000-year-old sanctuary in Turkey, appears oriented toward celestial points. If Gunung Padang's roots stretch back even further, then its builders too may have watched the heavens with intention. Critics argue that alignments can be coincidental. With enough stones and pathways, some will always point toward stars. The danger, they remind, is reading meaning where chance is at play. Yet the recurrence of alignments across unrelated cultures suggests more than coincidence. Ancient peoples depended on the sky. It guided planting, migration, navigation, and ritual. To ignore the heavens was to ignore survival itself. Why should the builders of Gunung Padang be different? Local traditions give the idea poetic depth. Stories tell of ancestors who spoke with the stars and gathered knowledge from celestial patterns. In some versions, the hill was described as a ladder or stairway to the sky. The image fits, terraces rising into the night, each step bringing worshippers closer to the constellations above. In the darkness, without modern light to wash them out, the stars over Sundaland would have burned fiercely, mirrored in pools and rivers below. To stand on Gunung Padang then would be to stand at the edge of heaven. Modern astronomy offers another layer. Around 12,000 to 20,000 years ago, the position of Earth's axis shifted through precession, changing which stars marked the poles and equinoxes. Alignments that no longer make sense today may have matched perfectly in the deep past. If the oldest strata of Gunung Padang date back 20 millennia, then its builders may have oriented their pyramid toward skies we no longer recognize. This would make the monument a fossil not only of stone, but of the heavens themselves. To imagine such an ancient night is to picture figures gathered on the terraces, eyes turned upward. Perhaps they tracked the slow dance of Orion, or the Southern Cross wheeling above the horizon. Perhaps they marked the solstice with fire, knowing that the sun's return meant survival. The pyramid would not only be a stage for ritual, but an observatory, a device for measuring the rhythms of earth and sky. And so the monument acquires another voice. It is not just a hill of stones, not only a resonant instrument, but a compass of the cosmos. Each terrace may echo with chants, each alignment with stars. The builders might have sought to weave themselves into the larger fabric of creation, to stand in harmony with cycles that dwarfed their lives, yet gave them meaning. To walk its steps today is to retrace those ancient gazes. Even as city lights dim the stars, one can feel the pull of the heavens overhead. Gunung Padang points upward still, its stones like fingers extended to constellations, as if reminding us that our stories are not only written in the soil beneath, but also in the sky above. Legends cling to Gunung Padang as persistently as moss to its stones. In the villages nearby, elders tell of how the terraces were raised, not by ordinary men, but by giants. or by spirits who labored through the night. Some say the steps appeared in a single evening, conjured by a figure of immense strength who hurled stones across valleys and stacked them with ease. Others whisper that the gods themselves marked the hill, shaping it as a place where mortals could approach the divine. These tales, carried across generations, blur the line between folklore and forgotten memory. To dismiss them as pure invention is tempting, yet myths often conceal kernels of truth. When ancient people lacked the language to explain feats of engineering, they turned to metaphors of power. To describe a monument raised in the deep past, when tools were few and labor immense, what better explanation than giants? A single night of building echoes the mystery of construction methods we cannot yet explain. Stones so heavy, so deliberately placed, that modern eyes search for superhuman hands behind them. Across the world, similar myths arise. The Inca of Peru claimed their walls were built by Viracocha, a bearded god who commanded stone to move. In Ireland, the basalt columns of the Giant's Causeway were said to be laid by the giant Fionn mac Cumhail. In Mesopotamia, tales of Apkallu, half-divine sages, spoke of beings who taught humanity the arts of civilization. Perhaps these stories are cultural poetry, or perhaps they represent a universal response to encountering remnants of a forgotten age. At Gunung Padang, the myths are not only fanciful but practical. They remind us that for local communities, the hill has always been more than geology. It is a sacred presence, a marker of ancestral power. Farmers climbing its steps for ritual offerings were not archaeologists. They were heirs to a story that placed them in continuity with builders greater than themselves. The legend of giants transforms the monument into an axis of identity, linking ordinary life with mythic time. From an anthropological perspective, the myth of supernatural builders might also encode memory of real encounters. Perhaps the people who preserved these stories were descendants of migrants who stumbled upon the terraces long after their creators were gone. To find a pyramid already ancient, already cloaked in moss, would inspire awe. Who but gods or giants could have left such a legacy? In this way, the myth becomes a narrative bridge between known history and a past too distant to recall directly. Skeptics insist such tales are no more than folklore embroidered over centuries. Yet the persistence of similar motifs across continents invites a more generous reading. When cultures separated by oceans describe monuments built by beings beyond human strength, perhaps they are responding to the same enigma, the presence of structures that exceed the capacities we ascribe to ancient peoples. Myth, then, is not dismissal, but recognition, an attempt to grapple with mysteries that remain even today. And here, myth and science circle each other warily. Archaeologists debate the age of Gunung Padang, while villagers tell of gods who raised it overnight. Both grapple with the same question: who built this place and why? One seeks answers in soil samples, the other in memory. Each path acknowledges the strangeness of the site, the sense that it doesn't quite belong within the ordinary flow of history. As twilight deepens and mist curls along the terraces, it is easy to imagine the scene described in legend. Colossal figures moving silently in the dark, their shadows flickering against the firelight, their hands arranging stones as effortlessly as children stack wood. Whether these figures are literal or symbolic hardly matters. The myth lingers because it conveys what the site itself demands, that its creation was no ordinary feat, but something vast, almost incomprehensible. In the hush of the night, the stones seem to invite such stories. They stand as if waiting for giants to return, or for gods to speak again. And while archaeologists search for evidence, the myths remind us that sometimes history is not only unearthed in strata of soil, but carried in the words of those who refuse to forget. Gunung Padang, in its silence, has ignited voices across the world of scholarship. The hill itself does not speak, but the interpretations of its stones have divided experts, drawing clear lines between mainstream archaeologists and those working at the fringes. What should have been a quiet excavation in West Java has become, instead, a storm of debate over the very nature of civilization's beginnings. Within university halls, skepticism dominates. Established archaeologists argue that the claims of extreme antiquity, 24, even 28,000 years, are extraordinary but weakly supported. They point to flaws in methodology. Carbon samples taken not from construction mortar, but from soil, which could have been deposited long before stones were placed. They note the absence of artifacts typically associated with settled societies. No pottery, no tools, no evidence of permanent dwellings around the site. For them, Gunung Padang is a megalithic site, yes, but one likely dating to the Holocene, perhaps 2,000 or 3,000 years ago at most. Opposing them are independent researchers, some geologists, some alternative historians who see Gunung Padang as the smoking gun of a forgotten epoch. They emphasize the ground-penetrating radar scans that reveal chambers buried deep, suggesting multiple construction phases. They remind their critics that Göbekli Tepe was dismissed for decades as little more than a mound until excavation proved otherwise. Their argument is not only scientific but philosophical. History, they say, is too narrow, too unwilling to admit that humans may have achieved greatness far earlier than textbooks allow. The clash is not only about evidence, but about worldview. Mainstream archaeology guards a model of steady progress, stone tools to farming, farming to cities, cities to writing. The alternative camp envisions rises and falls, cycles of civilization erased by floods and cataclysms, with Gunung Padang as one of the few surviving witnesses. To accept the latter would mean rewriting the human timeline, expanding the definition of civilization into realms uncomfortable for academic consensus. Tensions have played out in conferences and publications. Papers proposing extreme ages are often rejected by peer-reviewed journals, criticized for overreach. Meanwhile, popular books and documentaries champion Gunung Padang as proof of lost worlds, attracting wide audiences but raising eyebrows among professionals. The result is a dialogue marked less by conversation than by confrontation, each side accusing the other of blindness, one to rigor, the other to imagination. Yet this clash is not without precedent. When Heinrich Schliemann claimed to have found Troy, scholars scoffed at the idea that myth could point to archaeology. When the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, their authenticity was debated for years. Again and again, the boundary between skepticism and discovery has been tested, and only time has shown which claims endure. Gunung Padang may be another such crucible, where certainty today yields to astonishment tomorrow, or where bold speculation fades into forgotten error. For the people who live near the site, these debates often seem distant. To them, Gunung Padang has always been sacred, regardless of its age. Yet even they have felt the tremors of academic conflict. Government initiatives to excavate more deeply have stalled at times under pressure from skeptical voices. Funding rises and falls with the tide of controversy. The hill itself waits patiently, while human arguments swirl around it like passing storms. The clash of academia reveals as much about us as about the stones. It shows how fiercely we guard our narratives of origin, how uneasy we are with gaps in the record. To admit that something as monumental as Gunung Padang could exist outside the accepted framework is to acknowledge that history may hold secrets we have not yet dared to face. And so the debates continue, fueled by pride, by caution, by curiosity. At dusk, as the terraces glow faintly under fading light, the clash seems almost irrelevant. The stones remain unmoved by human quarrels, their age and meaning locked within. Whether scholars call them medieval, megalithic, or Paleolithic, they endure, steady and silent. And perhaps that is the deeper lesson, that while we argue over the past itself remains, waiting for the patience and humility to hear it clearly. When visitors climb the terraces of Gunung Padang, they often sense a familiarity, something in the rhythm of rising steps, in the scale of human ambition carved into stone. That feeling is not unfounded. Across the world, pyramids and terraced monuments appear again and again, rising from deserts, valleys, and jungles. Egypt, Peru, Mexico, each distant from Java, each claiming no direct connection. Yet in their echoes, a pattern emerges, as if humanity, separated by oceans, heard the same call to raise mountains of their own. The Great Pyramid of Giza is perhaps the most famous. Built some 4,500 years ago, its limestone blocks weigh far more than the andesite of Gunung Padang. Yet the intention was similar, to create a structure that outlasts generations, aligned with the stars, binding earth and sky. The Egyptian pyramid is smooth-faced, geometric perfection. Gunung Padang, by contrast, is rougher, its terraces overgrown, its blocks irregular. One is a desert sentinel, the other a hill cloaked in green. Yet both whisper of a desire for permanence, a monument that resists time. In Peru, at the ancient city of Caral, plazas and pyramidal mounds rise from the Supa Valley, dated to nearly 5,000 years ago. Caral, like Gunung Padang, emphasizes terraces and platforms, spaces where ritual gatherings likely took place. Archaeologists believe music and ceremony filled its plazas, flutes of condor bone, drums echoing against stone. The sound of Caral recalls the ringing stones of Gunung Padang, both sites weaving architecture with acoustics. Far to the north, in Mexico, the city of Teotihuacan unfolds like a cosmic map. Its Avenue of the Dead aligns with celestial events, its pyramids of the sun and moon towering over the valley. Built more than 2,000 years ago, Teotihuacan mirrors Gunung Padang in its orientation towards the heavens. Both suggest that the builders sought not only to mark territory, but to synchronize themselves with the stars. Skeptics note that pyramidal forms may arise independently. A stepped structure is simply the most efficient way to build height with stone. Gravity dictates terraces, human hands follow. Perhaps there is no mystery at all, only parallel solutions to the same engineering challenge. Yet this pragmatic explanation does not account for the spiritual resonance. Across continents, pyramids became sacred, not merely practical. They were not fortresses or houses, but temples, observatories, tombs, gateways to other realms. Why did so many peoples, unknown to one another, choose the same shape to touch eternity? Some researchers suggest a shared inheritance. If humanity once clustered in regions like Sundaland before dispersing, then memories of monumental architecture may have traveled with migrating peoples. Others propose that cataclysms erased global connections, leaving scattered cultures to rebuild fragments of a once unified vision. In this view, Gunung Padang could be not an outlier, but a missing piece of a larger mosaic. Mainstream archaeology remains cautious. There is little evidence of direct cultural contact between Java and Egypt, or Peru or Mexico. The oceans are vast, the timelines different. Coincidence, not connection, is the safer conclusion. Yet even among the cautious, the parallels intrigue. Each pyramid, wherever it rises, seems to answer the same human impulse: to mirror mountains, to anchor the cosmos, to give form to the invisible. Standing on Gunung Padang, one can imagine travelers who never existed. Egyptian architects marveling at jungle terraces, Andean priests hearing the ring of volcanic stone, Mexican astronomers tracing Orion above a Javanese hill. Though they never met, their works rhyme across time and space. The stones of Java seem to hum with that echo, as if reminding us that human imagination is broader than geography, deeper than chronology. Gunung Padang does not need to rival Giza in scale, Caral in elegance, or Teotihuacan in grandeur. Its power lies in its persistence. It may be older, perhaps much older, than any of them. If so, it represents not a copy, but a source, a whisper from a forgotten chapter of human creativity, one that challenges us to rethink the story we tell about when and where civilization began. Among the many questions that Gunung Padang raises, one lingers with peculiar force. Who possessed the knowledge to build it? If ordinary hunter-gatherers are imagined as the hands that lifted each stone, then where did the vision come from? The knowledge of alignment, the sense of proportion, the orchestration of labor across generations? Some researchers propose the existence of a forgotten stratum of society, a class of engineers, astronomers, and architects who emerged long before we assume such specializations could exist. These forgotten engineers, as the idea has been called, would not necessarily have been many in number. In small, scattered populations, genius may have concentrated in only a few individuals, people with insight into stone, sky, and sound. Their role, however, would have been transformative. With the ability to organize, to measure, to direct construction, they could have marshaled communities into creating monuments like Gunung Padang. What survives today may be not only terraces of stone, but the faint shadow of their vision. Such a concept is not entirely alien to archaeology. At Stonehenge, studies suggest a guiding elite with astronomical knowledge coordinated construction, while the wider community provided labor. At Göbekli Tepe, intricate carvings imply artisans whose skills far exceeded those of ordinary hunters. In Egypt, scribes and architects held privileged positions, turning Pharaoh's command into geometry on a grand scale. If these patterns held true in later civilizations, why not in an earlier, now forgotten one? Skeptics respond that the notion risks romanticizing the past. Without artifacts, measuring tools, inscriptions, or detailed carvings, there is no proof of such a class. The site may have been built gradually, through trial and error, without the guiding hand of specialists. To imagine lost engineers is to fill a gap in evidence with desire. Yet gaps themselves carry meaning. The terrace's precision, the resonance of its stones, the suspected astronomical alignments, these suggest more than accident. Local oral tradition, in its way, supports the possibility. Stories of wise ancestors, often conflated with gods or giants, may be cultural memory of individuals whose knowledge surpassed the ordinary. A people who could read the stars, split volcanic stone, and plan terraces on a hillside would seem almost supernatural to later generations. What survives in myth as giants may have been remembered engineers, their skills magnified by the passage of time. There is another dimension to this idea: disappearance. If a group of ancient engineers once existed, why did their knowledge vanish? Catastrophe offers one explanation. The floods that drowned Sundaland may have scattered populations, leaving survivors without the means to preserve technical expertise. Another explanation lies in fragility. Knowledge can be held in minds and hands rather than texts. If those minds are lost, the knowledge perishes. Without writing, without institutions, expertise flickers like firelight, brilliant for a moment, then gone. This transience complicates our assumptions about progress. We often imagine history as a ladder, each rung a step upward, never lost. But what if it is not a ladder but a tide? Advances rise, crest, and then recede, leaving behind only faint traces. Gunung Padang may represent one such crest, the mark of a wave of knowledge that surged long ago, only to retreat into obscurity. Even in modern times, we recognize how quickly knowledge can vanish. Technologies mastered in one era may be forgotten in the next. Roman concrete, Mayan calendrics, Polynesian navigation, all lost for centuries before being rediscovered. If such losses occurred in historical memory, how much more could have disappeared in prehistory? The terraces of Gunung Padang may be one such relic, a durable artifact of expertise no longer visible. To walk the site with this in mind is to feel the presence of unseen architects. The terraces become not just stone, but testimony. That human imagination, even tens of thousands of years ago, could envision and execute complexity. The forgotten engineers themselves are lost, but their fingerprints remain, pressed into the alignment of blocks, the orientation toward stars, the resonance of stone. At dusk, when shadows stretch across the hill, one might picture these ancient visionaries, standing with eyes lifted to Orion, measuring with rope or sightline, guiding others to place stone upon stone. Their names are gone, their tools vanished, but their work endures, carried forward in moss and silence. And in that endurance lies a quiet lesson, that brilliance can flicker in any age, not only in the civilizations we remember. Beneath the tranquil green of Gunung Padang lies a land restless with fire. Indonesia is born of volcanoes. Its islands rise where tectonic plates collide, and its soil is rich because of eruptions that both nourish and destroy. To consider Gunung Padang without acknowledging this fiery setting would be to miss a crucial part of its story. For if the pyramid is ancient, it has endured not only the slow passing of ages, but the sudden violence of ash, lava, and earthquake. Core samples from the site reveal layers of volcanic debris interspersed with human work. Ash and pumice, compacted over millennia, speak of eruptions that once blanketed the hill. In some places, The stonework appears abruptly sealed under layers of fine volcanic dust, as though construction ceased and catastrophe followed. To geologists, this is no surprise. The region's volcanic history includes colossal events, some of which may have shaken the entire world. Most dramatic among these is the Toba eruption, roughly 74,000 years ago. Though far older than the pyramid itself, Toba's memory lingers in the region's geology. Later eruptions, closer in time, could have disrupted life for early builders. The eruptions of Mount Galunggung, only 100 kilometers away, are recorded in historical times. How many more occurred in prehistory is difficult to say. Earthquakes, too, have scarred West Java for ages, fracturing rock and unsettling slopes. Gunung Padang's terraces may have been toppled and rebuilt more than once, survivors stubbornly stacking stone again where it had fallen. The theory that catastrophe buried parts of the monument gains weight from ground-penetrating radar. Chambers deep below the surface appear sealed, untouched for millennia. Were they deliberately entombed, or were they swallowed by earth shaken loose by quakes? Some researchers propose that entire levels of the pyramid slid and were covered by volcanic debris, preserved like fossils awaiting rediscovery. In this light, Gunung Padang resembles other sites shaped by disaster. Pompeii, frozen in ash, was preserved by sudden destruction. The city of Akrotiri on Santorini vanished under volcanic debris, only to re-emerge centuries later. But unlike those places, Gunung Padang may have endured multiple calamities over vast spans of time, each layering new soil, each forcing people to rebuild or abandon. The monument becomes not a single creation, but a survivor of cycles of fire and ash. Local myths once again align with geology. Villagers tell of angry spirits shaking the earth, of fire from mountains driving people away. Such stories, stripped of their divine language, may record real disasters. To remember catastrophe as the work of gods is a way of giving meaning to chaos. Perhaps the builders, after each eruption, returned to the hill not to erase, but to honor, preserving the place as sacred because it endured where others were lost. For skeptics, the role of catastrophe offers a simpler explanation. They argue that much of the structure attributed to human design could be natural. Rocks fractured by quakes, arranged by landslides, then mistaken for terraces. In this view, Gunung Padang is less a pyramid than a geological accident, with human rituals later layered on top. Yet even this cautious interpretation admits the power of the land itself, a power capable of shaping both stone and imagination. If disaster played such a role, then Gunung Padang is more than a monument. It is a dialogue between humanity and a volatile earth. Each stone laid is an act of defiance against fire and tremor, a way of saying, "We will remain." To build on a volcanic slope is to accept risk, but also to acknowledge that in destruction lies renewal. The soil enriched by ash sustains crops. The stones fractured by quakes provide material for terraces. In this sense, catastrophe is not only enemy, but collaborator. As twilight falls, one can imagine an ancient scene. Smoke rising on the horizon, the ground trembling beneath bare feet, voices chanting as stones are placed in haste before the world shifts again. The monument, layered by disaster, stands as testament not only to human ingenuity, but to resilience, the determination to build even when the earth itself seems intent on unbuilding. In the quiet symmetry of Gunung Padang, some researchers claim to glimpse not just architecture, but geometry, patterns that hint at an understanding of form and proportion far older than expected. The terraces do not rise haphazardly. Their steps, angles, and dimensions suggest rhythms that echo mathematical relationships, the same ratios that later civilizations would revere as sacred. To walk its pathways is to move through a design that feels both deliberate and symbolic, as if the hill itself were inscribed with invisible equations. Measurements of the site reveal recurring ratios. Some stairways align with simple multiples of human stride, while terrace lengths appear to repeat proportional relationships seen in later monumental works. Advocates of sacred geometry point to harmonies between width and height, to triangles implied by alignments, to circles traced by pathways around the summit. These echoes remind one of the golden ratio celebrated in Greek temples, or the geometric order embedded in Gothic cathedrals. Yet Gunung Padang, if its oldest layers truly date back tens of millennia, would predate them all. To skeptics, such observations are coincidences. Given enough measurements, patterns will emerge, even if unintentional. Human minds are adept at finding order in chaos, projecting meaning onto random alignments. But even skeptics admit that geometry often arises naturally when building with stone. To create stable terraces requires proportion. To climb steps comfortably demands regular spacing. In this sense, geometry may be less a matter of mysticism than of practicality. Still, practicality does not erase the possibility of symbolic intent. Across cultures, geometry has always been more than mathematics. For the Egyptians, the pyramid embodied cosmic order, its sides reflecting the rays of the sun. For the Mayans, temples encoded calendars within their steps, each stone a marker of time. Even in prehistoric Europe, circles of standing stones tracked solstices, turning geometry into ritual. To imagine Gunung Padang as part of this tradition is to see its terraces not merely as platforms, but as diagrams of belief, an effort to harmonize human life with the universe. Some researchers extend the idea further, suggesting that certain layouts at Gunung Padang may influence energy within the space. They speak of earth energies concentrated by stone arrangements, a concept often dismissed by mainstream science, yet persistent in alternative archaeology. Whether one interprets this as literal energy or as symbolic alignment, the intention remains clear. The builders may have sought to create a place where human presence resonated with larger forces, whether celestial, terrestrial, or spiritual. The experience of standing on the summit supports this impression. The terraces seem to radiate outward, each step expanding into the landscape like ripples from a stone cast into water. From above, one sees patterns, lines converging, forms repeating, symmetry imposed upon the natural hill. Even if no precise formula guided the builders, the result conveys a sense of harmony. One feels not only the weight of stone, but the balance of space. Local traditions reinforce this perspective. Rituals performed at Gunung Padang emphasize order and repetition, offerings placed in symmetrical arrangements, chants recited in measured cadence. Such practices mirror the geometry of the site, translating stone ratios into human rhythm. The hill becomes a theater where geometry is lived, not merely built. If sacred geometry truly lies within Gunung Padang, its significance stretches beyond engineering. It suggests that early peoples, even in the Paleolithic, sought to map invisible truths onto visible structures. They did not build randomly, but in dialogue with principles they perceived in nature. The cycles of the moon, the angles of the sun, the spiral of shells, the branching of trees. By encoding these patterns into stone, they made the hill not only a monument, but a cosmos in miniature. At dusk, as shadows fall across the terraces, the geometry reveals itself most clearly. Lines of light and dark trace diagonals and arcs, patterns hidden in midday glare. It is as though the hill itself waits for twilight to unveil its design. Whether born of practical necessity or sacred intention, the result endures. A monument whose form whispers of balance, whose silence carries the echo of unseen equations. Gunung Padang stands in stone, yet nowhere in the annals of early history is it named. No carved tablets, no painted scrolls, no inscribed stele whisper of its builders. The silence of records is almost as haunting as the monument itself. For if the pyramid truly reaches back tens of thousands of years, then it predates writing by a vast margin. But even if it were younger, built in the age when other cultures recorded their deeds, the absence of any written memory unsettles. Why would such a structure endure while the voices of its makers dissolved into silence? One explanation is simple loss. Writing in Southeast Asia appears much later than in Mesopotamia or Egypt, and the perishable materials once used, bark, palm leaf, bamboo, rot quickly in humid forests. Whatever records might have existed could have decayed centuries ago, leaving no trace. Oral traditions may be all that survived, compressed into legends of giants and gods. In this view, silence is not evidence of absence but of fragility. Words vanish, stone remains. Another explanation is erasure. History is written by successors, and successors often overwrite what came before. When new cultures rose in Java, they may have found Gunung Padang already ancient, already abandoned. To claim legitimacy, they might have woven their own myths over it, neglecting to preserve the true story. Conquest, too, silences memory. Victors may choose to forget, to sever ties with monuments of predecessors, leaving only stones to carry what people will not. The silence also raises a deeper possibility, that the builders of Gunung Padang never had writing at all. Civilization, as we define it, ties itself to script, records of trade, laws, prayers. Yet monumental building may not require writing, only memory and ritual. Instructions could have been sung, measurements carried in rhythm, traditions embodied in ceremony rather than inscribed in ink. To imagine a people without writing but with geometry and vision is to loosen the chains of definition, to admit that civilization might wear many forms. Comparisons abound. The builders of Stonehenge left no texts, yet their circle endures. Göbekli Tepe's carvers etched animals in relief, but not words. The people of Karal built pyramids, plazas, and instruments, yet their voices are silent to us. In this light, Gunung Padang joins a lineage of wordless monuments, expressions of culture that speak through stone alone. Still, the silence here feels heavier. Perhaps it is because Gunung Padang seems so anomalous, so far from the accepted timeline. If records had survived, names, dates, myths, we would anchor it in history. Instead, we are left with speculation. Silence becomes a canvas, and on it each interpreter paints their own image: lost continent, forgotten engineers, misdated rubble. The absence of words invites a storm of theories. Local people, however, never regarded the hill as mute. For them, the stones always spoke, through resonance, through ritual, through presence. They did not need written records to know the place mattered. Offerings, chants, and myths kept the memory alive. In their view, the monument's endurance was itself a record, one more trustworthy than fragile ink. Perhaps the silence of Gunung Padang is not absence at all, but another form of voice, one carried in continuity rather than inscription. And yet, for modern scholars, the silence stings. We long for a Rosetta Stone, a carved phrase, even a symbol scratched in haste. None appears. Only terraces and blocks, weathered by rain, remain. This forces humility. History does not always announce itself in words. Sometimes it endures only in silence, daring us to listen differently. As dusk folds over the site, one can almost hear that silence. Not empty, but full, like the pause before music begins. The stones hold memory in forms we struggle to read. Perhaps the builders trusted the earth more than ink, believing stone would outlast every word. In that, they were correct. Their voices are gone, but their terraces endure, whispering across time without speech. If the builders of Gunung Padang vanished, where did they go? The terraces, silent and enduring, suggest a community of vision and persistence. Yet no city surrounds the pyramid. No burial ground reveals its inhabitants. It is as though the people themselves melted into time, leaving only their monument behind. One hypothesis suggests they did not disappear, but migrated, carrying fragments of their culture outward across the seas, leaving whispers of their presence scattered across the Pacific world. The geography of ancient Sundaland offers clues. Before rising seas drowned the plains, the region was a crossroads linking Asia to the wider ocean. When the waters surged, communities would have been forced to higher ground or onto boats. Displacement, whether sudden or gradual, often sets migration into motion. Survivors could have sailed east toward the Philippines, Micronesia and Polynesia, or west toward India and beyond. In this view, Gunung Padang becomes not the center of an isolated mystery, but the anchor point of a diaspora. Genetics lend some support. Studies of Austronesian populations, the peoples whose languages stretch from Madagascar to Easter Island, reveal deep roots in Southeast Asia. Traces of genetic markers suggest expansions beginning thousands of years ago, spreading navigation, agriculture, and myth across vast oceans. While mainstream models date these migrations to much later than Gunung Padang's proposed antiquity, the broad sweep of dispersal hints that earlier waves may also have carried cultural memory far and wide. Language and myth preserve intriguing echoes. Polynesian traditions tell of homeland islands lost beneath the sea, forcing voyages across the Pacific. The Maori of New Zealand speak of Hawaii, an ancestral land across the horizon. In Hawaii, chants recall sunken realms and journeys to new shores. Even in distant Madagascar, stories of origins across the ocean persist. Each fragment resonates with the trauma of displacement, with the memory of waters that rose and lands that drowned. Could these be faint reflections of Sundaland's loss? Architecture, too, carries parallels. The stepped terraces of Micronesian Nan Madol, the stone platforms of Polynesian Marae, and the pyramid-like Ahu of Easter Island all serve ritual functions in elevated spaces. Though separated by oceans and millennia, they echo the terrace principle. raising sacred ground toward the sky. It is tempting to see in these structures the faint fingerprint of an ancestral model. Perhaps a memory of places like Gunung Padang, reimagined by descendants on distant shores. Skeptics caution against stretching connections too thin. Migration across the Pacific is well documented, but to tie it directly to a specific site in Java risks overreach. Cultural convergence, independent societies inventing similar forms, may explain the parallels. And genetic studies, while illuminating, do not yet trace any clear line back to a community of pyramid builders 20 millennia ago. The gap between evidence and hypothesis remains wide, yet absence of certainty does not silence possibility. Human history is full of wanderers, of groups driven by climate, by catastrophe, by necessity. It is not difficult to imagine a displaced people from drowned Sundaland carrying fragments of memory across seas, songs of stars, knowledge of terraces, myths of floods. Even if their monuments crumbled, their ideas might endure in new forms, embedded in rituals of island cultures, encoded in chants that still name vanished lands. In this light, Gunung Padang is not only a local mystery, but a point of departure. Its terraces may be the last fixed trace of a people who became oceanfarers, scattering their legacy like seeds across thousands of islands. The Pacific itself becomes their monument, each island a verse in a long song of survival. At night, standing atop the hill, the horizon stretches outward to the darkened sea. One can almost imagine sails against the starlit sky, figures steering by Orion or the Southern Cross, carrying with them not only tools and food, but memory. Memory of a pyramid on a hill, of stones that sang, of floods that chased them from their homeland. In the whispers of migration, Gunung Padang endures not only as a place, but as a journey, etched into the vast ocean of human story. The stones of Gunung Padang confront us with a dilemma. Were they raised by tools we no longer understand, or by the sheer force of collective will? To some, the terraces imply technology, devices of lifting, cutting, or shaping that have since vanished. To others, they reveal not lost machines, but the potency of human society, where ritual and cooperation transform impossibility into achievement. Between these views lies the central question: is the sophistication of the site a matter of material tools or of myth-infused organization? On the one hand, the argument for technology is compelling. Andesite is a hard volcanic rock, resistant to crude stone hammers. To split, transport, and arrange blocks weighing hundreds of kilograms seems to demand levers, sledges, or other aids. The lack of surviving implements leaves mystery, but absence is not proof of non-existence. Wooden beams, fiber ropes, and earthen ramps could decay long ago, leaving only stone behind. If such methods were used, then Gunung Padang reveals an ingenuity in engineering thousands of years earlier than expected. Yet there is another lens: ritual. Many anthropologists suggest that ancient monuments were not merely built, but performed into existence. Each stone moved might have been part of a ceremony, each terrace a stage where myth and labor intertwined. In such settings, work is not only toil, but devotion. Communities gather not under the command of machines, but under shared belief, chanting rhythms that synchronize muscles, transforming hundreds of hands into one. What appears impossible when imagined as brute force becomes plausible when seen as collective ritual. Ethnographic parallels abound. In Polynesia, Oral traditions describe entire villages hauling canoes across islands while chanting, the rhythm itself becoming a tool. In India, temple stones weighing many tons were lifted with earthen ramps and coordinated human effort, overseen by priests who marked auspicious times. Even in modern experiments, researchers have shown that large groups can move massive stones with simple leverage if bound together by rhythm and trust. If Gunung Padang was built this way, then myth is not an afterthought, but a driving force. The legend of giants building in a single night may symbolize the power of community working in trance-like unison, where laborers felt themselves transformed, no longer individuals, but parts of a being larger than themselves. Technology, in this sense, is not only tools, but belief, the capacity to mobilize energy by framing it as sacred duty. Still, we must not dismiss the possibility of techniques now forgotten. Even in later history, knowledge has slipped away. Roman concrete, more durable than ours, was lost for centuries. Ancient Indian metallurgy produced iron pillars that resist rust even today. Polynesian navigation, using stars and waves, was nearly forgotten until revived in the 20th century. What if the builders of Gunung Padang mastered a craft of stone, a subtlety of leverage, or even an acoustic technique for fracturing rock, now erased from memory? In that case, myth and technology may not be opposites, but partners, ritual guiding innovation, belief inspiring technique. The silence of artifacts keeps the question unresolved. Excavations reveal no chisels, no inscriptions of method, no diagrams etched in stone. Only the terraces remain, a puzzle without instructions. Yet perhaps that is part of their purpose. By leaving us with mystery, the builders ensure that we see their work as more than mechanical. They invite us to confront the limits of our imagination, to consider that human capacity, whether through machines or myths, has always exceeded what we expect. At Gunung Padang, the distinction between technology and myth blurs. The terraces stand as both engineering and story, both structure and ritual. They remind us that civilization is not only measured in tools, but in the ability to dream collectively, to turn belief into action. Whether with levers or chants, ramps or rituals, the builders found a way. And in that way lies the essence of humanity, the power to shape stone into meaning. As twilight gathers and the forest hums, one can almost hear the rhythm of ancient chants, the creak of ropes, the roll of stone. Was it technology, or was it myth? The terraces do not answer. They only endure, embodying both possibilities, reminding us that the boundary between them may never have existed at all. The name, Atlantis, belongs to a story told by Plato of a mighty island civilization swallowed by the sea. For centuries, it has lingered as myth, allegory, and dream. Yet whenever a lost land is imagined, be it in the Atlantic, the Mediterranean, or the Pacific, Atlantis is evoked. And for some, Gunung Padang stands as a fragment of such a vision, a whisper of an Atlantis in the East, born not in the pages of Greek philosophy, but in the drowned plains of Sundaland. Sundaland, as geologists reconstruct it, was a subcontinent stretching across what are now the Java Sea, the South China Sea, and beyond. At its height, it rivaled India in size, a world of rivers, lakes, and fertile plains. When the Ice Age ended, glaciers melted and seas rose, submerging much of that land. Within a few thousand years, a continent became an archipelago. To those who lived there, the loss would have felt cataclysmic, a world-ending deluge. Such a memory, carried in myth, could easily echo Plato's tale. Gunung Padang, standing on high ground, may have been one of the few monuments to survive. Its terraces, aligned with stars and resonant with sound, could have been the ceremonial heart of a people who once thrived on the plains now drowned. If those people dispersed, north into Asia, east into the Pacific, west toward India, their stories might have traveled with them, morphing into legends of a golden land lost to the sea. Atlantis, in this reading, is not only Greek allegory, but global memory. Fragments of a trauma experienced across cultures. Supporters of the Atlantis in the East theory note that many myths of Southeast Asia recall lands sinking beneath waves. In Java, Bali, and Sumatra, elders tell of villages claimed by the sea. Polynesian lore describes ancestral islands vanishing. Even in India, ancient texts speak of submerged lands to the southeast. Though scattered, these echoes converge in suggesting that rising seas carved deeply into cultural memory. Gunung Padang, by its very survival, may anchor those stories to a tangible place. Skeptics, as always, urge restraint. Plato's Atlantis was never meant as geography, but as allegory, a cautionary tale about hubris. To map it onto Sundaland is to mistake philosophy for history. Flood myths are universal, they argue, because rising seas at the end of the Ice Age affected nearly all coastal peoples. Gunung Padang, however intriguing, cannot by itself prove the existence of a lost global civilization. Yet myths endure because they answer needs deeper than fact. Atlantis speaks to the fragility of greatness, the suddenness with which stability can vanish. Sundaland's drowning, whether or not it inspired Plato, certainly embodied that fragility. Imagine fertile plains vanishing within a few lifetimes, rivers swelling into seas, ancestral homelands reduced to memory. For those who lived it, the trauma must have seemed cosmic, a punishment or fate. To build terraces on high ground may have been an act of resistance, a vow to remember even as the waters claimed everything else. Gunung Padang, in this sense, does not need to be Atlantis to carry the same meaning. It is a monument that bridges memory and loss, survival and disappearance. Whether its builders called their land Sundaland, or by names long forgotten, they too faced the terror of vanishing ground. They too carved permanence against impermanence. They too may have told their children stories of a world before the flood. As night gathers, the hill becomes an island of its own, surrounded by seas of shadow. Stars ignite above, mirrored in imagination as if the drowned plains still reflected them. One can almost hear the whispers of migrants setting sail, carrying not only tools and food, but myth. The myth of a homeland lost, a civilization erased, yet remembered in stone. Gunung Padang, Atlantis or not, endures as a reminder. Every monument is also a memory, and every memory is a kind of survival. For generations, the word civilization has carried a narrow definition. It conjures images of cities rising from river valleys, of writing etched into clay or papyrus, of kings and empires carving their names into history. By this measure, civilization begins in Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus, or China, no earlier than 6,000 or 7,000 years ago. Yet Gunung Padang, if its deepest layers are as old as suggested, unsettles that framework. It forces us to ask, what if civilization is not only a matter of writing and empire, but of knowledge, vision, and endurance? The terraces on the hill do not speak of bureaucracy or conquest. They do not reveal palaces, markets, or armies. Instead, they suggest something subtler. A community bound together by ritual, by geometry, by an awareness of sky and stone. If such a society could rise 20 millennia before Sumer, then civilization may be less about walls and laws than about the ability to imagine beyond survival. Civilization, in this sense, is not the first city, but the first collective dream given form in stone. Anthropologists have long wrestled with this problem. Sites like Göbekli Tepe already complicate the timeline, showing hunter-gatherers carving monumental enclosures long before farming. Corral in Peru reveals urban planning without evidence of warfare. These anomalies hint that the story of humanity is less linear than we assume. It may be that scattered communities in different corners of the world achieved moments of extraordinary complexity, only to vanish, leaving faint traces behind. Gunung Padang could be one of those moments, an isolated crest of human potential, forgotten until rediscovered. Such a reconsideration challenges the ladder-like model of progress. If civilization is defined narrowly, then Gunung Padang must be explained away as natural formation, coincidence, or error. But if civilization is defined broadly as the capacity to shape nature in symbolic, enduring ways, then the terraces stand proudly within it. In this view, the builders were not anomalies, but ancestors, proving that the human mind has always held the spark of complexity. Critics argue that to broaden the term risks diluting it. Civilization, they insist, requires writing, hierarchy, surplus agriculture. Without these, we are left with ritual sites, impressive but not transformative. Yet, perhaps transformation is precisely the point. To carve terraces into a hill is to transform landscape into memory, to turn geology into culture. Whether the builders farmed or hunted, whether they ruled or wandered, they transformed their world in ways that still compel us. Is that not civilization in its essence? Local traditions, again, offer perspective. To the communities of West Java, Gunung Padang has always been a sacred place, woven into their sense of belonging. They did not need it to be part of a textbook definition. For them, the monument embodies continuity, a place where the living meet the ancestors. In their eyes, civilization is not a matter of records or cities, but of connection, a thread tying past to present. If we adopt such a view, then history opens. We begin to see civilization not as a single dawn in Mesopotamia, but as many dawns scattered across time and place. Some rose into empires, others faded into silence. Some left libraries, others left terraces. Each, however, testifies to the human impulse to build, to remember, to seek harmony with forces larger than ourselves. Gunung Padang may never reveal whether it was 28,000 years old or far younger. But its challenge is clear. It asks us to reconsider what we mean by civilization. If the builders were hunters and gatherers, then hunters and gatherers could also be visionaries and architects. If they were farmers without writing, then farmers without writing could still reach for the stars. Civilization is not only the sum of texts and armies, but of dreams embodied in stone. As night settles on the hill, the terraces glow faintly in the fading light. They are not ruins of a lost city, but whispers of another kind of greatness, one that does not fit neatly into categories, yet endures all the same. To walk among them is to expand one's sense of history, to realize that civilization is not a straight line, but a constellation. each monument a star in the vast sky of human possibility. The hill lies quiet now, its terraces draped in moss, its stones cool beneath the touch of night air. Whatever hands once lifted them, whatever voices once echoed here, are long gone. Only the forest breathes, only cicadas sing, only the stars drift above, as they have for tens of thousands of years. The debates of scholars and the whispers of myth fade into the same hush. Some insist Gunung Padang is a relic of a forgotten civilization, others that it is merely a hill rearranged by human patience. Yet standing here, the distinction matters less. The stones endure, and in their endurance they teach. They remind us that humanity has always sought permanence in a world of change, always raised monuments against the flood, the fire, the tremor, the silence. Perhaps the builders were visionaries with tools we cannot imagine. Perhaps they were communities bound by ritual, their strength not in machines but in shared belief. Perhaps they were both. What survives is not their names or their language, but their presence, carved into the land. And that presence reaches across time, touching us still. To walk among the terraces is to feel history expand, no longer confined to neat lines and chapters, but spreading like constellations. Many lights, some bright, some dim, all part of the same sky. Gunung Padang may be one such light, faint but persistent, reminding us that our story is longer, stranger, and more beautiful than we know. The night deepens. The forest exhales mist. The stars wheel slowly overhead. The terraces rest, as they have for ages, untroubled by our questions. And so the story, too, rests. It does not resolve, but softens, leaving space for wonder. Close your eyes. Let the hill fade into dream, its stones still warm with memory, its silence carrying you gently onward. Whatever the truth of its builders, the monument has done its work. It has endured, and it has spoken. Good night.